We're live.
Great. What a fun challenge to be set. What a fun challenge to be set by our Newcastle Pirates, who we've got to know over the last couple of years. And it's timely because our trip to Newcastle to meet the startup crews was one of the first, it was the first trip we went on together, wasn't it?
It was literally the first train journey we took up to Newcastle to work with Tradecraft.
And there was all sorts of shit going on. And then we spent that evening, and it went from being like a half-hour talk to a 3-hour workshop and drinks, and it was quite a good moment to get to know one another. So it feels timely that we're now having a conversation for the same community as you take over the reins of captaincy of Be More Pirate.
Yeah, you're going to have a female captain, which I think is what's needed and is necessary. Definitely.
I know it's what's needed, and I know you are what is necessary. But it also means fun that I get to ask each other some questions about this book, because we're obviously so mired in it. A lot of the time it's quite process driven. So I had a couple of thoughts. I'd like to ask you, if you could choose anyone who most needs to read this book now, who would you like to read it and act on it?
Oh, that's a really good question. Are you talking about somebody famous or well-known, or just a sort of, a stereotype of somebody?
I'll broaden it out. So I started the original at the end of 2016, and I had a small child, Brexit, Trump, this whole world, and my world had been about trying to change the world, and I felt so frustrated. That's my subtext. So kind of, what's your subtext? Who's been the Navy that you've seen over the course of this year? When have you been riled up? When have you been writing, sometimes, who's the argument aimed at sometimes? Who would you most like to read it and fucking change their ways as a result?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so that's a really easy answer to that. The people that I think need to read it are, and I'm going to say this, in the same way that you say in the beginning of this new book, Sam, I mean this with love and respect, but I mean it with love and respect wrapped around a brick. It's a great phrase.
That's a great line.
It is a great line.
I stole it. So, just before I give myself too much credit, I've just remembered. Anyway, carry on. I'll come back to that, please.
I would say that the people that need to walk are the vast majority of us who are comfortable and sleepwalking, who've gotten used to a certain level of stability and security, and a quite a nice life, and could probably do a little bit more. And some of the things that we need to challenge and could challenge, we're simply not doing, because of a little bit of fear. And what I've discovered with the Be More Pirate community is actually, once you start to turn that on its head, and once you start to do these kind of what we call small bold actions, it's that fear sort of dissipates, because it's actually more empowering than you think to really to actually step up and start to take I hesitate to say take back control, but take a bit more ownership and agency over the things you see around you. And I think we've gotten very, very used to moaning about this, the politicians or the system, or this is the way it is. But actually what I've seen with the community is that there are so many little things you can do. And also in the research, in the journey of understanding this concept of rebellion and rule breaking and disobedience, for me, has been so eye-opening, because and seeing it as actually a responsible choice, and that you are creating better, safer outcomes when you break rules. So this idea that I'm going to create chaos because I start being a bit disruptive, it's just not true. The levels of disruption that we need are so far from anything like that. We simply need people to start, asking the questions, putting their hand up, stepping in, writing those, part of the battle is just telling the truth, putting your actual thoughts on the table for a change.
So is there, in any way, to get deep, parts of the book that you've written to yourself? Because there's, what you describe, the vast majority of us, those with something to lose, that kind of sense of fear could do, at times over this journey, that's sometimes how you've described yourself. And how much of this work was partly reflective because you've become a pirate over the time that I've known you?
Well, I'd ask you that back at yourself, Sam. You were writing Be More Pirate for yourself. I suppose, maybe writers write love letters to themselves that are like, who do I want to be? What's the fantasy version of me? And how can I put that into this? But yeah, I was disappointed at myself in many ways over the last decade. I let the passion and the integrity sort of be squashed out of me in some way, because I really learned to believe that the way things are the way things have to be. I genuinely was convinced by people who were, I guess, supposedly more confident or I imagined were smarter than me, which is again you're saying if no one's coming to save you. Once you understand that deeply, that naturally there are very few people who really understand all of it and have the answers, and you do go back to yourself, you turn inwards again, and you start to think, okay, well, what do I really believe? Like, what is my genuine assessment of the situation here? And yeah, I definitely did write it to not to convince myself, because I was already convinced, but knowing that there were other people like me, for sure. And I definitely think that's been amplified this summer with Black Lives Matter. I've seen a lot more people who wouldn't usually say anything about issues of social injustice, for example, come out and say things.
So you're once again proving your credentials for this role, because I didn't realise how much I wrote Be More Pirate to myself until afterwards, and that's how kind of lost at that time I was. So it's good that you know it. But journeying inwards is really hard, and it's a core part of Be More Pirate. You know, how in the fuck do you navigate without a map unless you've got a good sense of where you are, like where your compass is at? And I think you've done an incredible job of that. I admire it a lot. I think you hold yourself to account, you question yourself an awful lot. But I think it's innate in people, and it's innate in crew, and I know how much other people and crews and relationships mean to you, that we often only see ourselves when we see it in the face of someone else. So what are the moments, or what are the pirates, or what are the stories within the crew when you really began to believe this? Because you were a skeptic for quite some time, even when we'd started working together. So what pirate stories, or who was it leaving, you know, this book that allowed you to believe it as well?
It's a good question. I think one of the first ones was the story in the second chapter of the book, that talks about the pirate. It's the pirate code that came from the Child's Rights International Network, CRIN, because I suppose there's an academic or somewhere in me, just through training, that says if people who deal in human rights law think that this should be taken seriously, then this is pretty serious. If people who've dealt with the nuances of legal kind of action are saying, actually, we really don't need a business plan or a 10-page strategy anymore, we need this kind of quite simplified value-based code that will help us to translate principles into behaviors, then I thought, well, they've really taken time over this. This is well presented, it's detailed, it's thought through, and it was the time, I guess it was the moment that really made me think differently about this concept of values, which has been taken the piss out of so much, and is obviously something that so many businesses will often spend a lot of money on trying to get right, but it was fundamentally always done the wrong way, because it was done without the consensus piece. Yeah. So the differences of the pirates would get the consensus and build it together, make the culture like totally explicit and sort of alive.
Yeah.
Whereas most organizations will get 2 or 3, the smart ones or the creative ones, to write something out, some document, and go, this is who we are. And it's like, who we are is who we are all together, ultimately.
And where is that consensus going? Because I look up to that kind of way of working, but the first book for me was very different from my usual way of working, of consensus and collaborative. I kind of wrote it on my own. I workshopped it a lot, but it was my ideas. And what I really enjoy is the few sessions that I've come to that you've run. Like, there's such a diverse crew. There's so many people, and you've got these quite deep relationships, and you're allowing that crew and that consensus to shape the direction of travel. So can you give a sense? I know getting the book launched next week is your priority at the moment, but have you got a sense of where the adventure goes with you in charge and this consensus and this growing crew around it?
I do sort of let it form itself. But one thing I want to say just about that diversity point is that, like, it often feels quite messy and uncomfortable. But as time goes on, there's a sort of consistency in that, and that starts to almost become comfortable in a way where I'm like, okay, this is just how it runs. You get totally random people turning up every time, along with some quite consistent regulars, and every time those new voices will change the dynamic and throw something out there, and people go, oh, okay. So it never allows itself to become like a tribe of the same people, which I find really fascinating. But yeah, I'm starting to see that just in terms of the crew dynamics, there's a consistency forming. In terms of where it's going long term, like, there are definitely, I want to focus on a couple of areas. I want to see some proper social shifts. Like, there's that original pirate concept of that you put in the book of reorganize yourself, figuring out a different social contract. And I think that there's this moment forming with coronavirus around the role of communities, and communities become kind of fashionable word rather than a sort of, I mean, I remember the previous job role, somebody saying, don't write about community in a newsletter because it sounds a bit village hall, sounds a bit provincial. And now now it's become a moment. So I think I speak to this in terms of like business models, and like, how do you shift ownership more? So more businesses looking at how they can, have, create shareholder value amongst more people, share it amongst the community, have ownership like that. So I think there's a kind of movement forming around that. We'll call it democracy, call it kind of, it's a power sharing thing. And there's lots of different ways you can do it. So I'm seeing lots of different people pick it up in different ways. There isn't like one way. And then we've always had this brilliant health and social care crew who are, I think, are really starting to pin down some areas within the sector that could shift. But they're going to be quite nuanced and specific to the people who know about that. But yeah, so I want to try to support those areas to just see some kind of maybe pivotal changes happen. But then there's also just there's so much scope. Like, there's always been a kind of, I feel like, a food and drink kind of piracy going on in one corner as well. So
lots of different
I don't know, there's loads.
Yeah. It feels like it though, and that's the thing. I know you were asking when we were thinking about this conversation, but when did I realise that this was more than a book? And
yes,
I wonder when you're going to realise, what you've created, and where it goes next. So you know for a fact, because you met me when I just didn't really believe or couldn't quite come to terms with this growing community, and I needed that's where that other question came from, the verification of someone as smart and rigorous as you to help me understand and prove this thing was real. And that's what this book is to me, and what it's created. So why, in shorthand, why is this book better than the first one? And I'm being provocative, deliberate, because I think it is. I think it answers the question that the first one didn't, and it's necessary. But if I'm surprised that 2 years on we've got this, what would you be surprised at? What's like the most ambitious, exciting place this could be 2 years on the back of the book that you've led?
I don't feel like I can answer that yet. No, and I don't want to bullshit it. I know, I'll know when I know.
Yeah, right.
I think there's a lot of things brewing. There's quite a few projects, and I know that when they emerge, I'll be able to see like, oh, this is really where the impact lies. But I can't. I'd like to see. I guess, to put it broadly, I'd like to see Be More Pirate as a framework, and I think that the second book builds on the framework of the first to show what parts of it are really applicable. I'd like to see that framework applied more deliberately and more perhaps slightly more structured way into key projects. Like, I'm talking about placemaking strategies as we start to figure out how, because I kind of believe it, in a broader devolution agenda, that we should be giving more power to sort of localized places, and I think that would help. That would work within the current context. But so where you've got sort of placemaking strategies, using it to for when businesses, new businesses are starting, using this as a framework to build upon it, and having it woven through whole teams in big organizations. And I guess that has happened to an extent already, and that's what this book is for. But I guess, more deliberate and probably more wide scale.
Yeah. It's a good. I think often the only honest answer is I don't know, and I certainly didn't know that where we'd get to is. And I think you've done, and it's part of what we've talked about. You do a really good job of, to use a term, emergent leadership, but resisting the desire to go, here's the vision of the place that we're going to go, and hold on to the idea that we don't know. And I think that's true to the spirit of adventure, and it's true to the crew that you're telling that you're giving a chance to help shape and lead it. But there are some things that are on the radar. There are some fights for sure. Like, and which of those interest you most? 2021, the book is really going to unfold. It's out at first in the UK. There are some big challenges coming next year, and there's some big navies, or naval representatives. And you're going to get asked the question that I got asked loads, which was, well, isn't Donald Trump a pirate? Because when the book came out in 2018, that was the kind of name. And, Boris Johnson has just led the UK through some fairly major fucking wall breaking. So what will be your response to that and some of the other big challenges?
Okay, yeah. Sam, we know that there are two major things on the horizon here, which we talk about. The first is the climate challenge, right? Because we both don't see climate change as sitting alongside other things as one issue anymore. It isn't one issue. It's the setting within which everything else will play out. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about health, when we talk about democracy, racism, whatever, it's all playing out through the concept, like the setting of our environment, which is going to change and will affect so many things. So where people stand on that and how seriously they take it, and how much that, people still believe that some kind of Elon Musk figure will save the day, or whether they think that resilience resides more in ourselves and more in our communities and our, the way that we support each other. And I think we've blatantly seen that through coronavirus. We've seen that in absence of a vaccine, what do we rely on? We rely on our connections to each other and helping each other out. The second challenge is obviously, as we've talked about before, the kind of culture war. That how entrenched are you going to get in your own point of view? How much are you going to defend to the hilt a point of view that you've held forever, and you really don't want to give up this identity, even if things start to really, really change around you? And I think, I've definitely been questioned and challenged on that in terms of being more pirate before, because people have gone, we don't want to sound like, a bubble in ourselves. Like we can't become like pirates to the hilt. Like I try to describe in the book that this idea of pirate is like is a creative rebellion. So it's a continual disruption of yourself. And if you can't keep questioning, and still always seeking the edges of the map, whatever that might be, then you're not really pirate. If you think that it can just be one thing and then you stick to it like it's an ideology that never changes, then that's not being pirate to my mind. So yeah, I think that the ability to step back, and it's a bigger culture thing as well, because I've seen this is also the subtler point of the how-to is the Myron's maxim. I'm going to get this wrong now, definitely. I can't even remember it now, but the point being that the how you do things is the only thing that matters. So we get very, very focused on like what the end goal is. Like I'm going to build a hospital, for example, but actually the how you do it is actually determines the future that you get. So right. It's like, do we have a workplace that's fun every day? That ultimately determines what that kind of environment is like, not whether we get, do this output. So yeah, I think there's a bigger conversation about the cultures that we create in all the places and the businesses that we're building. And I've seen some very, very conscious, deliberate efforts to change culture. And there's obviously a risk on one side that you go overly woke as well, that you're like, you can't say anything. And that doesn't seem effective either, because you need to have some freedom of expression and to accept that people make mistakes and get things wrong and are clumsy. So we're still working out what that is. And when I do sessions, we kind of go for this. It's a safe space, but a brave space. So you can be yourself, but there you go.
Well, that makes me think of a kind of summary question as well. So, and you're good at that, and Myron's maxims do that as well. So, I ended up discovering, I think, that my shorthand, or how I perceived people using pirate, was as a byword for permission.
Yeah.
Now you've gone on this adventure. What's your updated definition of being a pirate, or your shorthand for how to be more pirate?
I think permission still is really key. And that's what I said at the beginning, I suppose, about this idea of rule breaking. Like, how much I thought about this the other day. I thought, sometimes I don't even know what I want, because there are things that I want that I still don't give myself permission to want. And that sounds really sad. So when people say, well, what do you really want? And I'm like, well, I can tell you in a realistic sense, and I can tell you in a real sense. And I was like, wow, I'm even putting barriers up. And I think we all do that. So permission really is key, and like unraveling the onion layers of permission is quite a job for everybody, I think. And but definition of a pirate now. Yeah, so this is a really important point about what you were saying about when you wrote Be More Pirate, and you wrote it for the millennials and the entrepreneurs and the hustlers and the young pirates that you saw. And what I discovered in writing this book was the people who really paid attention to it were not those people that you were talking about because they were already pirate and they already kind of got on with it and had their purpose. It was the people who were trapped in these permission-based structures, big organizations, corporates, whatever, who really needed to hear the message in order to give themselves that courage. So a pirate is the person who's able to move from the inside to the outside. And, that's a pretty broad interpretation. Inside to outside can be lots of things. It could literally be feeling like the insider, or like part of the crowd in your meeting, and then suddenly being the person who speaks out. It can be moments rather than a huge leap. But it's that transition, that moment where you decide, because it's so important, not so much because what you're going to do is going to be revolutionary in that moment, but because it has such an impact on you, because you start to rediscover your agency again. And that's what a lot of us have lost, whether it's through the permission thing or whether it's just through our scrolling obsession, which are with the distraction of the 21st century.
Well, it still seems true that for anyone interested in this work, that the first and possibly the most important rebellion is the one against your self-limitations, and that's, I've come to learn, and you just clarified, is an ongoing journey, right? Each time you think you've escaped, what you're actually getting to is the next layer of the prison, the onion, the pirate, or whatever that's going to be.
Yeah,
absolutely marvelous. So for our Newcastle pirates listening to this, because that's the broad crew, the Northern Mutinies go on. They're all invited to come and get involved. How does somebody up there who's listened to this come aboard the good ship Alex Barker's Be More Pirate?
Yeah, so I'd say if you sign up on the website, you will actually get a proper sort of response with some starting points for how to be more pirate, some links and things. And if you've got,
it's a clear change from the previous captain.
But to be honest, no, I mean, it's taken me a long time to get there too, because it is, we're still a big ship and two people with, sporadic kind of crew members. But so, yeah, so a few kind of links and things, but it very much depends on what you'd like. I still welcome personal interaction. I think it's important, and I fundamentally don't want to automate everything ever. So while you'll get some starting points, I'm always open to like people's suggestions and ideas and things that are on their mind.
So it's alex@bemorepirate.com.
Yeah.
Come join the ship, join the mutiny, join the growing crew, and see where Alex is going to take this thing.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you for sending me the questions that then inspired me to turn this around on you. And thanks for letting me do that.